Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nächste Runde rückwärts, as we say for the German Kirmes. It's a new episode. It's a new day. It's a new way. It's us at the Mayhem and Masterplans podcast. Hello, everybody. Hello, Andreas. Hello, Simon.
Hello.
I love how I love how I can annoy Andreas with my intros.
Singing. Yes. Hello, everyone.
Is it
Welcome
just
to Mayhem and Masterplans.
You don't like the singing, or you don't like my singing?
Let's move on.
So we have discussed why YouTube statistics, right? And
yeah,
maybe I have a guess now why they are how they are.
That's right. If the drop off is right around the time when you start singing, maybe.
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
tough content analysis is always important to kind of grow the brand.
We don't have the numbers yet to make definite decisions on what's causing this.
Right. So we keep singing for now.
Do we have benchmarks? I want to have benchmarks. So is it
the weather talk?
Is
the
it
weather
average
talk before?
Is it average what we got, or is it way below average? No.
I'm inviting
above
you.
average.
I think it is way too early to obsess over numbers. I think we should continue having some fun and talk about interesting things and
that's true.
Entertain you, dear listener.
Exactly. And maybe we can kind of like ease into the topic, because while you mentioned that, the numbers, it's too early for numbers. Generally, numbers are really important in business, but I think numbers aren't the things that gotten people into developing new stuff, right? Like so. How do you make
yes,
trade-off?
and no, right?
Like, well, it's a difference, right? I think there's I don't know how to define it. There's the word entrepreneur, right? So and that's kind of like in German context, an entrepreneur is a person that kind of like does the VC play, right? They look at a market. They like the founders of a new startup, so they look at a market segment, they analyze it, they see there's huge potential, and then they go out and collect money from VCs and stuff like that, right? And then in German, you have the Unternehmer, right? That is interested in building a sustainable business that's generating wealth for multiple generations within a family, right?
But
how would you define that in English? So the difference between those two?
Well, for one thing, there is none, right? So entrepreneur is just generally a word that you could translate to Unternehmer in German. Mm-hmm. And an entrepreneur can be the guy who opens up a flower shop at the corner or who spins up a new restaurant. An entrepreneur does not mean it needs to involve a VC or a VC play. If that is being used like that, kind of in the German entrepreneur landscape, then I guess that's an offshoot of that. But in general, when I hear entrepreneur, I don't think of necessarily a VC conversation. That is something that I would have to find out and that I would want to learn as I learn more about the venture and the idea and the thing that this entrepreneur is building.
So if you had to decide, because I was listening, so we did a podcast recording last week with a guy that built an amazing company, and he's now like in Germany, he's really big on TikTok and Instagram. So he built this company that does like Effect Energy, Salitos, some kind of like vodka brand. So he started off as a distributor for, like, he imported beers, and the company name is MBG. It's Miller Brand Group. So he was one of the first people in Germany importing Miller beers.
Okay.
And from that, he started his business. It now grew into like 250 million in revenue
Nice.
And it's growing, and he's he and just like 3, 4, 5 years ago, he started creating this persona and developing his like social media game.
Okay.
And it's quite interesting. And he so like but he started his career as a banker.
Mhm.
So that's where we did like his 3 years of training, his traineeship, and then started his business. Like numbers are super, super important. It's kind of like
Yes.
what you need to have as a founder. And 100%. And for me personally, that's always been the stuff that I don't like the most, and that's the toughest part to learn for me.
I
Um,
I think that's important to think about, and I think you won't be able to run a good business or to run a business well without having a command of numbers, without
Right.
having either
exactly.
yourself or on your team somebody who can crunch numbers, who can interpret numbers, and kind of read the story that numbers might be telling you and explain that to the rest of the team. And then to make, hopefully good decisions based on numbers, data, right? We hear a lot about data driven this, data driven that. In many instances, you'll find that anything that is supposedly data driven, yes, is data driven, but that also means that people abdicate the responsibility to just make a decision or to have an opinion or to, let their experience actually do the talking. So leaving that kind of aside, the good way of looking at numbers is absolutely understanding business basics, cash flow, revenue, profit. How do you do this? How do you manage this in a sustainable way that you can, at least in the early phases of a business where it might not be humming along quite so nicely just yet, that you can sustain it, especially over kind of times when it might be a little dry. But there's fundamentally two ways to start a business. The one is that you are really passionate about something, and then either you yourself or with the help of somebody on your team, you layer on this number experience and the numbers aspect to this. But somebody is really passionate about the product, about the thing that they're building, like you are about podcasts, for example, and about podcasting as a means of building trust and developing good communications in companies. But there's also another absolutely valid and legitimate way to build a business, which is coming from the numbers perspective and analyzing areas that might be ripe for innovation, or that might be, where there might be a market where the incumbent players just haven't moved along quite as much with, say, technological progress. A great example is my former employer, Getty Images. Getty Images was founded by what were then two investment bankers. And you couldn't tell that if you talk to these guys these days, because they live and breathe, even to this day, where they're kind of already out of the day-to-day business. But if you get a chance to speak to one of the co-founders of Getty Images, they live and breathe good imagery. They live and breathe good photojournalism. They have absolutely learned and developed an appreciation for the craft and the people who, commit the photojournalism and do the craft. But they came to the business by looking around and looking at markets that were clearly stuck in the past in their ways of doing business. And back then, image libraries, stock photo archives, generally delivered their images on slide dupes. And once or twice a year, they put out big the catalogs of new images that they had and that they offered, and they sent those around. And then the ad agencies that needed something went through the catalog and picked the one and called them up and said, I need number XYZ. And then somebody made a dupe or picked a dupe and sent it to them on loan. And the co-founders of Getty said, well, there's this new thing, this internet thing, and couldn't you use that? And so there were no asset management systems back then. They built one of the very first dams in order to allow digitized images to be sold via the internet, right? And so numbers are super important. But I find that I always find that numbers are often used as a crutch or as an excuse for a lot of people to, not use their experience or their passion on something. And that I find that sad when I encounter that. And I try to encourage people to really kind of combine that better.
I totally agree. So it's one thing that I kind of like realize for myself is like get more into the numbers, and I think my take on this, and it really depends on, and that is kind of something you need to look at as well, and that's kind of like an augmentation that he made to the statement around like you need to be really good at your numbers. It really also depends on your business, because we're building a software company with an attached agency. He was building a marketing and sales company with inventory that he was selling. So you have to kind of like appreciation, depreciation. You have like stock of materials. So it's very cost intense and investment intensive, because you need to kind of like make your quotas and that kind of stuff. So I think numbers in that kind of context are much more important than if you're running a software business where other numbers become important. But I think and that is something that I realized. So when we started, right at the beginning, we focused because we wanted to be really good, and in my opinion, we tried to overcompensate and have like a very, very clear business plans. And then you realize that early on in a business, it's super difficult to make anything from numbers, from like we're in a new industry, so no benchmarks really exist. So you kind of have to find your own benchmark. So that kind of like we invested too much into numbers on like a business plan side, but you need to kind of like focus on the numbers of, and Simon and I talked about it today of the recording, that you should have a look at how much effort is going into earning that $1, that €1 that you're making, and just by time invest and all that. So that kind of gives you a bit of perspective, and then what is really going out, and very, very basic.
Are you saying you need to understand the cost of goods sold?
Well,
but
yes, that's what you're saying.
And not just understand it, but really obsess over that.
Yes, of course. But I want to give you more credit than you're giving yourself here. I think what you said, you went maybe too much into the business plan and too much into the number side at the very beginning. I don't think so. I think you did that just the right amount, and you've had a very good business plan with lots of assumptions. Of course, in the beginning, you have to have lots of assumptions. And so as more and more of those assumptions were proven out and validated, you were able to adjust some of them, and you had to adjust some others. So I think one of the biggest issues is with people getting into a business, being passionate enough about it to get pretty far without any kind of business plan or without any kind of meaningful business plan, right? They have, I don't know, a spreadsheet with a couple of columns and there's some numbers in there, and they call it their business plan. But I actually think with Hypecast, we erred on the right side of this. even though, yes, at times it might have been a little over
Sometimes
complex.
probably a bit like over-invested, and at some points
Maybe.
not
Yeah.
invested enough. So I think
Sure.
you're trying to strike a balance. But
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue into what we actually wanted to talk about. And that's kind of like, what's the alchemy behind, a company, that what makes a company work. And it's, on the one hand, it's the numbers, yes, of course, and we're all building a business. But we talked about it today, that uh, maybe the role of organizations and of companies is changing a little bit. We've seen that, what is it, the Edelman Trust Index
Yeah.
or something. You already know, because people are losing trust in like, and we're not judging. We're just, describing the situation. People are losing trust in politics. People are losing trust in media.
Mhm.
But what is kind of like the source of trust that people now have, and it's your own organization.
It's ever more the own company, or the
Yeah,
company that
totally.
employs you. Yes. That is something that is actually so. In the US, we've seen those numbers tick up and shift towards the company as the trustworthy entity over the last couple of years already. In Europe, that still feels a little strange, and still especially among media organizations, they don't like to hear that. They don't like to acknowledge that people are kind of turning away from them as being a trustworthy or the trustworthy source. And I think it's actually important to acknowledge that for many people, it's not so much a question of either or. It is more of an augmentation and more of an addition to the trust mix, right? But
Yeah.
the important aspect that you wanted to get to, or that we discussed, was really, yes, my company, the company that employs me, I can trust them within certain parameters, of course. But as an employee, I know why they exist. I know why we come to work every day. I know that my bosses want to make their numbers, want to make a profit, want to make revenue. And so
And
within
and
those
and I
parameters,
think I think you're leaving out a few important things. It is, I'm spending a lot of time with them, so like, it's the other thing that comes from Clifton StrengthsFinder or Gallup, is I have a friend in my company, so it's a huge part of your social life.
absolutely.
And I think, in the end, it's that organization, that entity, that helps me to pay my bills and keep a steady
Yeah.
life in my private life. I think that is something you like, what do you say? Like, don't bite the hand that feeds you. So it's kind of like you're trusting that. So because they're, in the end, helping you to kind of like design your life the way you want to design it. And it plays a huge role in that, right?
Mhm.
Evermore. So, Simon, sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I think for me it's a bit counterintuitive, because I think the American culture, or the American culture in business, is famous for the toughness, maybe, or so that they, for example, Max, you told me that one was it client say to you, okay, I don't need some parties or festivals for Christmas dinner or a
Yeah. But
party,
but
because
I
I
was the
just I
same
just
way. I
want.
was the same way in my
Yeah.
business, right? I didn't
And
need that kind of like fluff.
yeah, appreciation or culture, or yeah, so you are just here, or yeah, just go to work for the paycheck and for learning something, and but not for
I think you
gathering
need to
with
I think
people.
you need to adjust it. It's not like, it's not necessarily that you say, like, I don't want culture in my organization, and I don't spend time with my, like, I'm not invested with my company. I think it's a difference between the idea of like, hey, we're all a big family, or I'm here the same way I'm here because I want to play football, and I'm in a football team or something like that. I think like it's some people kind of
I
like
think you
mix it
I
up
think
with
you're
like, you're not invested in an
I
organization,
think
but
you're getting lost in
yeah,
some of the details. I think the bigger picture is that people want steadiness and
yeah,
reliability. And So, speaking of mayhem and master plans, if you have mayhem in politics or perhaps even your personal life or your community in some way, shape, or form, and you know that your bosses have, at least a somewhat reliable master plan, then that is absolutely preferable. And yeah, of course, this is where your paycheck comes from. This is what enables you to live your life, and all of that. But I think just the mere fact that this is something that is reliable and trustworthy in the sense that
And it
you
gives you
understand
structure, right?
why certain decisions get made. You might not agree with them necessarily, but it's at least understandable and replicable. And there is a steadiness to it. And I think that is really, and if that is then well communicated by the leaders, that's all it takes,
And
right?
and that's I think the part that comes into play now. If you know that, so all the numbers show that, and at the same time, how do you deal with that? So what do you like? Why are we talking about us? So why are we talking about that this is kind of like a movement that we see on the employee side? What kind of like implications does that have for overall business? I think long term, this might result in building a new form of culture within an organization
Mhm.
that is and that has one thing to do with I want to keep my organization steady because only steadiness provides me with the necessary means to grow and generate revenue. And the other part is in the world where human resources become scarce, qualified human capital, if you want to use that term, employees, team members,
People. It's
people.
people, Max.
Well, no,
Humans.
but that's like
And sometimes dogs too and cats, but
there, there there's people, but you need the right people for your organization. And once you found them, it's going to be more and more difficult. So you want to you want to kind of like turn around and have that. You want to rely on your employees as well, right? You don't want to get into an environment where you hear about companies that, and I think Tesla was the example. They had like 130% turnover in employees in the last
God.
like
Really? I didn't
per
even
year.
read that.
And,
That's
and there's a few companies like that have a
Yeah.
high turnover that pretty much kind of like renew their entire organization.
Mhm.
And if you know again the numbers of how much it costs to hire new people and how much
Oh,
brain
absolutely.
drain is happening in an organization.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the driver for I mentioned this to you guys earlier. So Forward Momentum got engaged by Dunkin' Donuts to look into exactly that.
Mhm,
In a certain area, we try to assess why they have such a specifically low turnover rate, and basically to find out what they're doing right versus what everybody else clearly isn't. And the findings we came back with were, I mean, uh, super simple, really. It came down to trust, reliability, communication. The people who worked there within those areas of Dunkin' Donuts or within those stores, they felt like they were part of a family. They felt like their leaders saw them as humans, treated them
mhm,
respectfully.
Mhm.
And even though they might have not necessarily agreed with every business decision, with every change, so some people described us over the years how, you used to bake the donuts in one big plant and then drove them to the stores, and then over time that changed, and you now bake them in the stores, and that of course led to changes in the staffing at the major bakery plants and all that kind of stuff. But this all comes down to them feeling like this is the best place to work because of the people that surround me, my immediate team, but also because of my bosses and the way they explain things to me and the way they talk to me and the way they clearly respect me. Even though I'm just the guy behind the counter making the coffee and selling you a donut. And I thought that was, it seemed obvious at times. And in fact, once we presented these findings to the immediate leadership, they were like, well, yeah, of course I treat my employees with respect. How
Yeah.
do you mean? Why is this even worth a slide in your
Underwear.
presentation? Right? It was amazing to see it. And once we
How many
presented it to
how
the
many
higher ups
employees
in the more
do
corporate
they
chain, they
have?
were like, "Yeah, maybe we should work on this." It's
Uh,
wild. It really is wild.
Yeah.
But it comes down to talk to your people and treat them as somebody you would talk to.
How many employees do they have?
Dunkin' Donuts as a whole, I don't know.
Yeah, or in that area. So it was a franchise, right? Or is it a franchise
Yeah, it
system
was a
where
franchise. The way Dunkin' Donuts is organized is via
Yeah.
franchises, and yeah, this was a specific franchise.
And
But-
how many employees do the
I think they had something like 20 or 25 stores. I don't
Okay.
know, a couple of hundred.
Okay.
So definitely more than you would. So it was so many that the bosses could not kind of stop by every store every day. And yet they strive to stop by every store every week.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think another example is my sister. She lives in Tunisia, so and so she's a woman in a Muslim country, working in an industry, in a hospitality industry that's rather male dominated in general, and so she treated everybody like tough, but also very respectful.
Mhm.
And so she was able to kind of like establish herself within a very difficult environment that you would think, but by just being like ticking those boxes of like, I'm going to be respectful to everybody. I'm just going to like, I'm also going to tell everybody like what I expect from them to do in my role. And, I'm also going to go the extra mile for them because that's, and I hope in return that I will get the same. It's something that people could very much rely on because they were very like they would know what to get from her, right? They could kind of like really pinpoint her down as like this is kind of like the profile of that person. The same way with her husband, he's a hotel director, um, and he's Tunisian, and he works like he used to work in Tunisia and Morocco and all that. Um, and he's a tough boss,
Uh-huh.
but he in a way that like he expects a lot from his employees, but he's super fair when it comes to payment, when it comes to like being respectful of people's times. And he's in his hotel, he has one of the lowest turnover rates
Mhm.
in employees. Because usually like the contracts get terminated by the end of the season when like in October, November, and then they get rehired in February or March.
Mhm.
Which for a lot of other places within their organization and outside their organization, a lot of people leave and go somewhere else
Mhm.
because everybody's fighting over the same people. In his case, not because people exactly know what they're getting. They're like, it's tough, but he's fair. He is very honest. He communicates really well. He communicates with everybody. It doesn't matter if you're if you're cleaning or if you're the head chef or he treats everybody with the same level of respect. And that's why he has very low turnover rates. And I think it's kind of like being very clear on what you do and so again it's that kind of like you want predictability right in your life.
And it still comes back to that. Once you break it all down, once you take off the anecdotes and the examples, and once you
Yeah.
basically put it into generic terms, it comes back to communication, reliability, trust.
And I think and to me it's generally there's communication is kind of like the underlying or overarching kind of like mechanism because for me communications is a means is the means to an end, whereas some of the things are kind of like traits, right? You're being respectful, you are being honest.
Mhm.
But what kind of like helps you to communicate those traits and your personality and the things you do is then the way you communicate. And that is kind of like the thing that you have to get down, because it doesn't matter if you're good in certain places, and the way you kind of like, some things to some people is like, of course, like you describe, of course I'm going to do this. So you have certain actions that you do.
Mhm.
But then in a bigger organization, if you don't talk about and then do good things and
Exactly.
talk about it, it's like if you do good things and nobody hears about it because you don't talk about it, or nobody talks about it, it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't, as if it doesn't exist. So I think that
Exactly.
is kind of like the thing, that if you have those opportunities where you reduce turnover, where you build trust, and then people are willing to go the extra mile, so they're going to put in more work, they're going to stay longer, they're going to stay engaged, all those things that
Mhm.
everybody, it's now kind of like a push for that. And
I
so you as an organization need to really figure out
I
how to
I wanna
get
jump in there.
communications right.
Yes. And I wanna jump in really briefly, because you just said, they're gonna go the extra mile. Think about any company that does something, does so for their customers, right? It's kind of a truism, it's kind of obvious. But
Well, well.
yes, I know, I know.
They should.
Sometimes it's not entirely clear who the customer is, I give you that. But, um,
They should, at least. Yeah, I
so,
know where you're getting.
all joking aside, especially when you're describing examples from the hospitality area, right? The customer, so going the extra mile. There was a time, for example, when I loved flying Delta because you could tell that Delta flight attendants liked their job. They liked being on that plane, even when it got stressful, even when something was any other airline, they didn't want to be there. They really didn't. Delta folks, they wanted to be there. And so I paid extra money to be on Delta flights. And that's the same thing. I'm sure that hotel that, in your example, where the staff comes back and makes a point of coming back, I'm sure the returning guests love the fact that they see one of the staffers again. Um, I've seen that myself, and I appreciate that. And this is something that makes such a huge difference. And yes, you're right. It comes down to communication, right? The bosses need to say what they expect. They need to talk about what they do in order to make that happen, to make employees' lives, I don't want to say easier, but manageable, and to allow the employee to actually provide that service. And sometimes it's also really important for leaders in organizations to just talk about what motivates them. Why do they do it? Right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, this builds the trust. Because, simple example, if you just notice that your paycheck arrives on time all the time, then you just take that as a given. If you ever hear your boss acknowledge the fact that this is an exchange of your time for my money, right? I pay you for the time that you spend at my company. And I am aware of that. And I know that you might like this job and you might even like me personally, but you are doing this job in order to pay for your life. So I am not going to fuck with that. I am definitely going to go to any length I can to make sure that your paycheck arrives on time, no matter how tough anything else is. The same goes for external contractors, right? If they send an invoice, we're not going to look at it and say, ooh, 7 days, 30 days, 60 days net. Okay, let's push it off for 60 days and then start paying it. So it's going to actually take 70 days or shit like that. There's too many companies who play these games because, of course, they optimize cash flow and the accountants love it. But it minimizes trust and it minimizes, reliability ultimately. And once people hear that their bosses think about this, that it matters to them, that they take this seriously, this is suddenly an entirely different conversation, an entirely different feeling of going to work at this place. Just by hearing and knowing that they acknowledge that I'm here to earn my paycheck, to then pay for my house, my family, my food full of fridge, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
It's simple things like that. And you don't need to make a big production out of it. You don't need to make this a topic of a podcast for that matter, right? In your company. But every now and then, when that conversation comes up and when this matters to a leader, they might mention it. And this is something that kind of will, build up the fabric of a company.
Yeah, totally agreed. I think that is something that you, as an organization, or especially within leadership, I think it's something that that y- that will be the focus of, or should be the focus of leadership training over the next years, because there's too many people. I think back, like in the early 2000s, we had a time when the trust in CEOs kind of like ran lower, where like every 3 years they, something is going bad, they're going to leave, they're going to have a new job, and then we're going to be stuck here. And so now it's changing, because people start trusting more in the organization. They're going to trust in not just top leadership, but it's also going to be, and that's going to be the interesting part. You have middle management, because usually CEOs can be very good and convincing and persuasive, and because they had that training. But what it comes down to is like your direct line managers, the middle management, that kind of like the country managers. And usually those people aren't the best communicators, not because they are too stupid. It's not just because they haven't received the proper training, or haven't
Mhm.
empowered by the teams with the right tools to kind of like, so they know like, oh, what have we learned? Like, you want to inform everybody, send in an email, or we're gonna do a high, like, as you mentioned, like a high quality production in a video studio, where you're gonna feel super awkward standing there and trying to be like a TV host, which you're not built for. But so nowadays we have different forms of communication, fireside chats, you have podcasting, internal podcasting, you have so many, like you have so many different tools, like Teams meetings, whichever way you want to go. So then try to take the toolbox of communication tools that you have, and start communicating. Maybe start within smaller groups, kind of like test and learn, so you don't have to like go out and do you know, a podcast for the entire organization, and then just, crap out because it's going to be bad. So try it out, test and learn, and kind of like develop your skills, right? That's kind of like what you need to go for. And I think it's I remember back in the days, people were saying like, "Oh, people that work in communication." I was working in an organization, and people are like, "Oh, people work in communication. That isn't a real job. Like the people, trading, and the people making the money in sales. Those are the real important jobs." Yes, those are important jobs, but an organization will never, never, never run just on salespeople. I just remind you of the movie Wolf of Wall Street. Right. It might be a place for that. It might be people for that, but overall, I think again, the overarching kind of like thing within an organization, when it comes down to it, is whatever you do, it's internal, the same as external. Communication is key, and you see it right now. How some people are doing it really well. Also, not communicating. There's a few people in the US that you don't hear currently talking about
Well,
anything, and there's a bunch of people that are going out and communicating heavily, or, and those are the kind of people that get a bit of backlash, where, stock prices are plummeting within their organization. So, there's examples of leadership and good and bad communication out
Sure.
there, and how to manage it.
Yeah, but I mean, we have a few more minutes. Let's actually leave a plug here for what we do at Hypecast, because I love the fact that we give companies the opportunity to not make a big production out of all of this, not to overthink it, but to really get started and do this in an easy, lightweight fashion that is easy to produce, easy to to consume, and that allows people to, yes, like you mentioned, also practice things and to kind of find their voice, if you will,
Yeah.
right? I feel it really does hit the sweet spot for many, and probably most of them haven't really ever thought of it, right, or haven't really taken it into account. So, yeah, if this is something that any one of you guys out there listening to us, finds challenging in your organization, feel free to reach out and talk to us, think about it.
Somebody was
Always
quiet
happy to
today.
help.
Somebody was quiet today.
Yeah.
So
So
I want to hear
I
him
listened. I listened really. Yeah.
interested. But that's the kind of
Interest.
thing, right? So you're like, I've known you for quite a bit, and everybody who doesn't know you're generally a bit like, compared to me, you're really quiet, but um, I might just be very loud. But I just want to hear your take on the whole topic of communication, especially for somebody who likes to listen and um, keeps communication not to a minimum, but
It's very
it's
deliberate. You're very
very
deliberate
deliberate in
Deliberate,
in your
communication.
yeah.
communications.
So what's your whole take on this, and what's your perspective?
Yeah. So normally, I think the advice for leadership, especially in nowadays environments like hybrid work, remote work, is over communicate, right? So communicate as much as you can, and maybe repeat it yourself as often you can. I'm not sure. I can see where the idea comes from, but I don't know if that's really the best idea. I think I'm more about I'm thinking more about um so yeah so what culture you create with your communications, right? So if you communicate just super tough things, or or your communication is super professional, like, right, you have always super high produced videos, or if it yeah so I think it's more important to communicate, like from, like, yeah, from, what is it, from eye to eye? No, what is it, right? No,
On eye level.
on eye level.
Mhm.
And yeah, like, so, and communicate that you are really open for everyone, right, and has an open door for everyone, so that everyone is also also like to talk to you, or like to contact you in with a certain question or with a certain topic. So I think that's more important. Be open, and then, yeah, com- communicative.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that people are not afraid of talking to you, and know that you are really a guy or a woman, where you can talk to with everything about it, right? I
Yeah.
would say that I think for me the most important thing, because in my young career as a young employee, or as an apprenticeship, I was often very overwhelmed by the leadership team, because they were really yeah well, I would say maybe, yeah, patriarchs and family owned businesses, so they're really the kings of the company, and only certain people, or certain colleagues were able to talk to
Oh,
them,
I
or
think we
allowed to
lost him.
talk to them. So
I think we lost him.
that was
But I think
really
we didn't lose the point.
We didn't lose the point. You were just gone for a little bit.
okay.
But you mentioned, like, overwhelmed by leadership. I think that's a very good point. I think it's being overwhelmed by communication that doesn't kind of like match where you are.
Yeah, the communication that doesn't speak to you, right?
No.
Exactly. So and I think over communication is the wrong thing. communicating on eye level, making it more informal. So trying to just like keep it low production. Rather, it's not like don't over communicate, but communicate more often, right? You don't have to have the 2-hour town halls every quarter. Do 10 minutes every week. And then you can just talk about less things and a bit more on eye level. Otherwise, you have to like every 3 months you have to come in and be like, let's give you a bit more context, and then you kind of like start a whole like story of like what is happening in the last 3 months. You're like, I don't care. So communicate more presently, more actively, more in the now. I think those and that will already help with like communicating on eye level, communicating not down to people but with people, and I think I think we need to keep this conversation going and do a bit more on communications and
we should. I think the one thing that we should end with is just the one thing that you just mentioned, right? You can communicate with people or you can communicate something to people. And there is definitely a difference in feel between communicating to you and communicating with you. And why don't we leave it at that?
Really, I'm just going to do a bit of promotion for the mic drop. Sign up for the new newsletter that launched last week, the micdrop.hypecast.one. Subscribe to our podcast, Mayhem and Masterplans. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. We all going to connect that in the show notes and drop it in the show note. If you want to do a podcast, especially if you want to communicate with people and not to people, you should definitely reach out. We're a global company. We work with amazing clients that have understood that already and are better for it. And so a little promo shout out. Let's finish off with the last songs that you listened to. Andreas, what was your last song?
My last song was Countless Skies by an Australian band called Bellacore. I'm not sure how they pronounce their name. I'll text it to you so you can put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Simon, what is your song?
My last song, okay. I think, it's not a child song. So I have a new streak, I would say. It is Marsh, Leo Wood, Over and Over. I think from the playlist, from some playlist. Juicy Lounge.
Nice. Sounds
a mix
good.
of deep house, ambient, and lo-fi house. Perfect for keep vibes fresh and ... booty moving.
Well, booty moving, body moving, whichever way. You got to move something. I could definitely see that. I listened to Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, trying to find a world that's been and gone.
That's a song?
That's a song. It's a great song. It's a really, really, really great song. I love it. The lyrics are amazing. I love the guy. Well, that's it. A long episode today, but we did a bit of like deep talk. Loved it. Communication's big thing. Let's talk about it some more in the future. Next week I'll be singing again. So a musical episode.
I'll be tuning in just a little later after the start.
That would be
A
pretty
musical
cool.
episode? Yeah. I totally hate musical episodes. Like we talked about it before. We can talk about it.
But is there already a new musical episode, a music episode in podcast?
I don't know.
Or
And
would we?
There shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. There shouldn't be one. There shouldn't be one.
I think
Pretty
naming the
cool.
last 3 songs or the last song that each of us listened to is just the right amount. And we should leave it at that.
Perfect, guys. Thank you so much.
See ya.